The cloak was not mine. I want to be precise about that, because everything that follows depends on it. The cloak, the rain, the woman who handed it to a stranger without looking at his face, and the wolf inside my chest who apparently decided, in that single unguarded moment, that 30 years of waiting were finished. I am Aldrich of Valdremore. I have been Alpha King for 11 years. Before that, I was a prince who sat in drafty council rooms and learned that a crown, however heavy, is the thing people look at when they speak to you, not your eyes, not your face, and certainly not whatever is living beneath your ribs. My wolf understood this before I did. He went quiet on my coronation day, not out of grief but out of patience. He was waiting for something the throne room could not provide. I did not know that. I thought he was simply tired, the way old wolves get tired, though I was barely 19 then and neither of us was old. By 30, I had stopped asking. The autumn I turned 30, my council produced a list. 17 women from 7 packs, all of them suitable, all of them accomplished, all of them perfectly aware that the man across the banquet table wore a crown. I sat through 14 dinners. 14 women spoke to me in the careful, brightened voice people use when they want something, and I watched them watching the sigil ring on my hand instead of my hands themselves, and I thought, this is not how the bond is supposed to feel. My wolf did not stir once. The 15th dinner, I sent my apologies and walked out of the castle through the servants' gate. It was raining. Valdremore in autumn is always raining, a fine, soaking river mist that settles into the stone and the wool and the back of your neck and stays. I had gone as far as the inner ward before I realized I had no coat. I am the Alpha King of Valdremore. I do not walk outside without ceremony and at least 2 guardsmen. I had broken in the space of 10 minutes approximately 8 protocols. It was the most peaceful I had felt in 3 years. There is a linen hall on the east side of the inner ward, not the formal laundry, but the working hall where the seamstresses and menders keep their frames and their baskets, and their long, good-humored arguments about thread weight. I had passed it thousands of times without noticing it. That night I noticed it because it was warm and lit, and the door was open 3 inches, and someone inside was humming. I did not go in. That would have been absurd. I stood in the rain in my good shirt like an absolute fool and listened to whoever was humming, and my wolf, who had not moved in months, turned over once in his sleep. The door opened. A woman stepped out carrying a mending basket on one hip and a spare cloak over her arm, and she nearly walked into me, and she stopped, looked at my sopping shirt with an expression of mild professional disapproval, said goodness, and handed me the cloak. Not asked if I wanted it, not waited to see if I was someone important. She simply extended it, the way you hand something to someone who clearly needs it, and went back to looking in her basket for whatever she had come out to find. It's not mine to give away, she said, still looking in the basket. But it belongs to Cotter, and Cotter won't miss it till morning, and you'll have caught a fever by morning if you stand in that shirt another 10 minutes. So. I was holding the cloak. It smelled of cedar and linen starch, and faintly of whatever she used on her hands, something with lavender in it, I thought. Thank you, I said, which was inadequate. She found what she was looking for in the basket, a spool of dark thread, and looked up at me for the first time. She was perhaps 26, with the kind of steady, unhurried face that has decided a long time ago not to be surprised by anything. Her hair was pinned up the way working women pin their hair, not for show, but to keep it out of the work. She had ink or dye on 2 of her fingers. She looked at me the way you look at a new guardsman, new to the ward, probably, lost in the rain, probably, and she said, "Are you one of Harwick's new recruits?" Harwick was the captain of the inner ward guard. I had promoted him personally 4 years ago. He had a habit of taking on new men in autumn. I said yes. It was the first lie I had told in 11 years that was not diplomatic. She nodded satisfied and went back inside. The door did not quite close behind her. The humming resumed. I stood in the ward wearing Cotter's cloak and I thought, 3 days. I will do this for 3 days. I will walk the ward as a guardsman. I will speak to people who do not know my face. I will find out what it feels like to be a man and not a symbol. And then I will go back inside and sit through the 15th dinner and do my duty. My wolf, somewhere in the dark of my chest, opened one eye. Guard Captain Harwick, to his considerable credit, did not have a stroke when I appeared at his office the next morning and told him what I intended. He went very still, the way experienced men go still when their king has said something startling and they are deciding whether to argue. Then he said, The lady of the court will not like this, sire. No, I agreed. If something happens to you, I will be in my own castle, Harwick. In a guard's coat. Yes. He looked at me for a long moment. He had known me since I was 12. He understood, I think, something I had not said out loud, that the 15 dinners had cost me something I could not name, and that I needed very badly to be nobody for a few days. 3 days, he said. 3 days, I agreed. He gave me a coat, a bunk in the outer barracks, a name, Aldrich, was common enough that it needed no change, which suited me, and instructions to report to the inner ward rotation. He also, because he was Harwick, gave me a look that said he would know exactly where I was at every moment, and that if I so much as tripped on a cobblestone, he would be there before I hit the ground. I put on the coat. It fit well enough. I looked in the small steel mirror in the barracks and saw a guardsman, tired around the eyes, perhaps, with a jaw that needed a razor, unremarkable. Good. The inner ward in the early morning is its own country. Tradespeople through the east gate, laundry carts, kitchen deliveries, the back and forth of the palace's actual machinery. I had seen none of it. I stood at my post at the east gate, and I watched my own castle breathe, and I thought, I have been king of this place for 11 years, and I have never seen it before. The linen hall door opened at 6:30. She came out with a cart piled with mending, repairs for the guardsmen's uniforms, as it happened, which meant she walked directly to the East Gate station and stopped in front of me and said, without looking up from her clipboard, "Are you the new one?" "Yes," I said for the second time. "Good, your patrol partner is a menace with buttons. He lost 4 off his dress coat in a week, and I have charged him for the thread twice already, and I am about to charge him for my time as well. Tell him Marin says to use the thicker thread when he sews his own and to stop being in such a hurry." She made a mark on her clipboard. "Also, your left cuff is coming loose." I looked at my left cuff. She was correct. She put the cart's handle in my hands while she rethreaded her needle, sewed the cuff back in approximately 30 seconds with the brisk efficiency of someone who does this 60 times a day, tied it off, handed the cart back, and walked away. The whole exchange lasted perhaps 90 seconds. My wolf, who had not spoken clearly in years, said, not in words, because wolves do not use words, but in the particular quality of an attention that has sharpened past the point of casual. "Third, I thought that is not possible." My wolf said nothing further. He simply remained alert in the way he had not been alert in years, like a lamp that has been low-wicked for so long you forget what the room looks like at full light. I reported to my post. I watched the east gate. I did not look at the linen hall door. At mid-morning, she came back for the cart. I managed not to look until she was 10 steps away. "Does the new one have a name?" she asked, not breaking stride, collecting the cart with one hand. "Aldrich," I said. "Marin," she said, already walking. "Don't let Petra talk you into skipping the afternoon briefing. She's done it to the last 3 new men, and Harwick blames whoever lets her." I said I would keep that in mind. She did not look back. My wolf said, quieter, more certain her. The first 3 days became a week without my consciously deciding it. I told myself it was research. I told myself I was learning things about the castle I needed to know. Both of these things were true, and neither of them was the reason. The reason was the linen hall and the woman who ran it. Marin was head seamstress of the inner palace, a position that sounds minor and is not, because the linen hall is where the castle's fabric goes when it tears, which fabric does constantly, and where the castle's uniforms are maintained and measured and remade when young guardsmen grow or shrink or, apparently, lose their buttons at a catastrophic rate. She managed 3 assistants, 2 apprentices, a delivery schedule, a budget that was perpetually insufficient, and an informal system of IOUs for alterations that she never pressed but never forgot. She was also, I discovered across the first week, funny in the way very busy people are funny, dry, precise, delivered without ceremony, usually while doing something else. She had opinions about thread tensile strength that she expressed with the kind of passion most people reserve for political convictions. She was unfailingly kind to the apprentices and unflinchingly direct with people who wasted her time. She had a system for everything and a name for every system, and she was not interested in explaining the systems to people who hadn't earned the explanation. She did not treat me with any special regard. She treated me the way she treated all the guardsmen, efficiently, without condescension, as if they were capable adults who could be expected to follow basic instructions and would be considered for additional responsibility once they had demonstrated they could manage the basic instructions. This was, I realized on day 4, the most straightforward I had been treated by another person in 11 years. I found myself at the Eastgate station every morning hoping she would come out with the cart. I found myself inventing small tasks that required passing the linen haul. On day 5, her cart wheel stuck on a cobblestone and I fixed it, not because I was the nearest person, I wasn't, but because I had seen it happen from 40 feet away and I was already moving before I thought about it. She thanked me without excessive warmth and offered me a cup of tea from her basket because it was cold and she had extra. We drank tea on the courtyard steps for 10 minutes. She talked about the problem of mending water-damaged wool without introducing shrinkage. I said I had heard that a cold rinse before pressing helped. She looked at me with mild surprise and said, "That actually works, yes. Where did you learn that?" I said I had read it somewhere. She looked faintly skeptical, not unkindly, just the skepticism of someone who files information accurately, and returned to her tea. My wolf sat very close to the surface and breathed slowly, the way he breathes when he is content. I thought, this is a problem. The bond does not ask permission. I knew this. I had known it since I was old enough to understand what a fated mate was, that the wolf recognizes before the man does, that the mark comes when the bond is ready and not before, that there is no negotiating with it and no postponing it and no deciding, really, anything at all about it except whether to honor it. I had simply not expected it to have such specific timing. It was the 7th evening. The inner ward was quiet, the late patrol rotation, most of the tradespeople gone, the kitchen finished with its main service. I had been doing something genuinely useful, which was helping carry a large bolt of replacement wool from the delivery gate to the linen hall, because it was heavy and Marin had been waiting for it since morning and her apprentices had gone home. We carried it between us. She had the front end, I had the back. It weighed as much as a small horse. We got it to the hall door. She pushed the door open with her hip, and we carried it inside and set it down, and she straightened and looked at it with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing and is quietly satisfied it has arrived. And then she laughed, a short, surprised laugh at nothing in particular, just the relief of the thing being done, and put her hand on my arm to steady herself while she laughed, the way you touch a solid thing when you need a moment of anchoring. The mark burned onto my wrist. Not a sting, more like something that had been waiting a long time to exist, and finally did. A clean, deep heat, and then it was there. The Valdremore wolf knot in dark silver blue on the inside of my wrist, the mark that every alpha in my line had carried when his mate was found, that I had been told about since boyhood, that I had privately stopped believing would come to me. She felt it, she must have, through my sleeve, because she went very still, and she took her hand back and looked at my wrist, and I had not moved fast enough to conceal it. And we stood there in the linen hall with the big bolt of wool between us and the evening light coming through the high windows, and the mate mark on my wrist glowing faintly in the low light like something that had been there all along. She looked at it, she looked at me. She said carefully, "That is a very unusual mark for a guardsman." My wolf at this juncture felt deeply vindicated and also not even a little sorry. I said, "It," and then stopped, because there is no good sentence that begins with "it just appeared," and also because everything I could think of to say was either a lie or an explanation so large it could not fit into the room we were currently standing in. She looked at the mark for another moment. She had, I noticed, the quality of someone who can observe something surprising without immediately requiring it to be explained to them. She was simply looking, the way she looked at a difficult seam, gathering information before drawing conclusions. Then she looked at me and said, pleasantly but with a precision that left no room for misdirection, "It is a bonding mark. I have seen them on mated wolves not often, but I have. This one looks like the alpha's mark." She tilted her head a fraction. "Are you a guardsman, Aldrich?" The thing about a fated mate is that the bond, once visible, does not permit comfortable evasion. Not because it compels honesty. The bond is not a compulsion. The teachers are wrong about that. But because being dishonest in the presence of the person you are bonded to feels like speaking in the wrong language. Like the words won't quite form. I said no. She waited. I said, "I am the Alpha King. I have been walking the ward in a guard's coat for 7 days because I needed to be nobody for a while. I apologize. I did not intend for this. I gestured at my wrist, as if the mark were a thing I had done to her, which in a sense it was. I know this is not simple. She looked at me for a long time. Marin's face, I had learned across the week, is not difficult to read if you pay attention. It simply moves through its assessments without performing them for an audience. She was assessing, now, with the same steady intelligence she brought to everything. Then she said, "I thought you knew too much about wool for a guardsman." I stared at her. She said, "The rinse before pressing." I looked it up. It's in an old textile manual in the palace library that most guardsmen would not have read. She looked at the mark again, briefly. I filed it as worth revisiting. I said with complete sincerity, "I read a great deal." "Apparently," she said, and then after a pause, "Are you going to tell me what happens now?" What happened now was that I had no good answer, and so I told her the truth, which is, I do not know yet, but I know that this mark is real and what it means, and I know that nothing about my behavior in the last 7 days has been designed to create this outcome, and I know, because she deserved to know, that the choice was hers. A fated bond is not a compulsion. A mark is not a claim unless both people make it one. She listened to all of this with her arms folded and her expression attentive, the way she listened when someone explained a problem with a garment, not impatient, not credulous, simply gathering. When I finished, she said, "So you have been walking around my ward for a week, lying about who you are, and your wolf decided anyway." "Yes," I said. "And you couldn't have led with that?" "I did not know it was going to happen." "You didn't know you were going to find a fated mate while pretending to be a guardsman?" "Correct." She appeared to consider this. "That's genuinely quite embarrassing for you," she said. It was, I said so. My wolf treacherously found this funny. She said, "I need to think. I would like you to go be a king somewhere else for a few days and let me think." I said I would do that. She looked at the mark on my wrist one more time. Do you have to do anything about it right away?" "No," I said, "it will wait." She nodded. She picked up her shears from the work table and turned back to the wool bolt. "Close the door on your way out," she said. I closed the door on my way out. I stood in the courtyard in the evening cold without a coat. I had given Cotter's back eventually, and I had forgotten to take a new one, and I thought, the Alpha King of Valdremore has just been told by a seamstress to go think about his behavior, and she is correct, and I will do exactly that. My wolf, more alive than he had been in 11 years, ran in wide, glad circles in the dark of my chest. I returned to the castle in the formal sense the following morning, which produced a significant amount of administrative difficulty and 3 separate council members who needed to know where I had been. I told them I had been conducting a personal inspection of the inner ward. This was true. Lord Hevan, who was the most politically alert of my council, looked at the mark on my wrist and went very still and said nothing, which told me he had understood more than I had said. By midday, it was known in the council chamber that the Alpha King had a bonding mark. By mid-afternoon, it was known that the mark had appeared in the linen hall. By evening, I had received 3 requests for urgent counsel, 2 from lords who wished to propose alternative matches before any decision was made, and 1 from my council's senior woman, Lady Orvin, who was the most sensible person in the building and who simply knocked on my study door, came in, looked at my wrist, and said, "Tell me about her." I told her about Marin. All of it, the cloak in the rain, the cuff, the wool bolt, the tea on the courtyard steps, and the talk about cold rinses. The 7 days of walking the ward in Harwick's coat and finding, for the first time in years, that being a person felt possible. Lady Orvin listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "She sounds like exactly the kind of woman this court needs and will initially not know what to do with." I said that was probably accurate. She said, "And does she know what she wants?" I said she had asked for time to think. "Good," said Lady Orvin. "That means she is sensible. Give her the time." She rose to leave. "And Aldrich, those lords who came to you today about alternative matches, do not see them." I said I did not intend to. "Good," she said again and left. I gave her 3 days. They were the longest 3 days I had spent since the first year of my reign, when everything was new and difficult, and I had no idea yet that I was capable of it. I worked. I saw to the business of the kingdom, which is always plentiful border negotiations with the eastern pacts, a drought in the southern farming holds that required rerouting grain shipments, The perennial question of the river tax that the merchant guilds wanted adjusted, and the river lords did not. I sat in council. I ate my meals in the formal dining room, which felt enormous. My wolf was not running circles anymore. He was patient, genuinely patient, the patience of a creature that knows what it knows and is willing to wait. But his attention was oriented toward the east side of the inner ward with the fixed, gentle persistence of a compass needle. On the third morning, there was a knock at my study door. It was not a courtier's knock. It was a practical knock, 3, evenly spaced, the knock of someone who has places to be and is not going to stand in the corridor indefinitely. I said, "Come in." Marin came in. She was wearing her working clothes, which is to say she was not dressed for a royal study and had not dressed for a royal study, and she was carrying, with the composure of someone who has decided on a thing and is doing the thing, her mending basket. She set it on the chair across from my desk and then stood and looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, "I have thought." "Yes," I said. "I have some questions." "All right," I said. She asked them. They were very practical questions, which I should have expected. She wanted to know if a bonding mark was ever, she was careful with the word, mistaken. I told her it was not in my knowledge of the line. She wanted to know what the bond actually meant in plain terms, not the ceremony, not the title, but what it meant, what she was and was not obliged to by its existence. I told her, nothing she did not choose. The bond was real, it could not be undone. But it was not a compulsion, and it was not a claim, and it was not, in my understanding of the word, an obligation. It was a recognition, the wolf's recognition of a person, and what came after recognition was entirely between the two people involved. She considered this. She said, "I would like to know you, actually know you, not the king." She looked at the mark on my wrist. "Though I understand those are not easily separated." "They're not," I said. "But I am also the man who reads textile manuals." She looked at me with the faint, exact expression I had come to understand meant she was deciding whether or not to be amused. "I noticed," she said. "It was suspicious from the beginning." And yet, she agreed. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the chair where lords and ambassadors and council members sat when they came to negotiate, and she picked up her mending, because she was not going to let her afternoon's work go undone simply because she was sitting in the king's study, and she said, "Tell me something true, something that has nothing to do with the crown." I thought about it. I said, "I find council sessions deeply tedious." "I am not supposed to say that." "Everyone finds council sessions deeply tedious," she said without looking up. "What else?" I said, "I cannot sleep when it rains hard. The sound of water on the stone roof wakes me, and then I read until dawn. My steward thinks I work through the nights. I do not correct him." "What do you read?" "Everything, history mostly, sometimes agricultural manuals. Once, a very long treatise on river navigation that turned out to be extremely interesting." She looked up. "Genuinely interesting or King Politeness interesting?" "Genuinely, the section on tidal compensation alone." "All right," she said, and she was trying not to smile and not entirely managing it. "That is probably enough." We stayed in my study for 2 hours. She mended. I answered her questions. Some of them were about the bond, most of them were not. She asked what I ate for breakfast, oats. I confessed, nothing glamorous. Whether I had ever actually used any of the ceremonial swords in the Great Hall, 2 of them, in training years ago. The rest were decorative, and I suspected at least one was not real steel. And what I would do if I were not a king, if such a thing were conceivable. I said probably something in forestry, which surprised her. And I explained about the Southern Holds timber management problem, which genuinely interested her. And we spent 20 minutes on that by accident. She asked near the end, "Do you want a queen or a mate?" I understood the distinction she was drawing. I said, "I want the person the mark says you are." "What comes with that, Luna Queen? Whatever title the court requires, I don't care about that. I care about the person." She was quiet for a moment, her needle still. She said, "I believe you." She said it the way she said true things, not with performance, not with sentiment, but with the same precision she brought to everything, the precision of someone who says a thing only when she is certain of it. I said, "Thank you." She looked at her mending. "I am going to keep working in the linen hall," she said, "for a while I understand what this is." "Of course," I said. And you, she looked up. You are not going to send anyone to oversee my work or reassign my assistants, or in any way interfere with the linen hall operations on the grounds that it is now politically significant. I said with complete sincerity that it had not occurred to me to do any of those things and that I would not. She nodded as if filing this satisfactorily. She stood, picked up her basket, and walked to the door. At the door she paused and she said, without turning around, "The cloak that first night, I gave it to you because you needed it, not because you were anyone." "I know," I said. "That matters," she said. "Yes," I said, "it does." She left, the door closed behind her with the same practical click it always made. My wolf lay down with his nose on his paws and breathed, slowly and deeply, like an animal that has come home. What followed was not simple, because nothing involving a court and a bond and a seamstress from the River Ward is ever simple. Lord Heaven made 3 appointments with my secretary, and I declined all 3. Lord Vesson, who had a daughter on the original list of 17, sent a letter that I read carefully and answered honestly. The bond was real. The matter was settled as far as my wolf was concerned, and I thanked him for his daughter's patience and wished her a genuine match. Lord Vesson was not pleased. 3 other families adjusted their expectations. There were pointed conversations in the dining hall, of which I heard reports from Harwick, who heard reports from everyone, because Harwick is the most informed person in the castle and has been for 15 years. Lady Orvin managed most of this with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has been managing courts for 40 years and has seen every variety of political inconvenience. She said to me once, "The difficulty is not the bond. The difficulty is that she is not from a Pack family and several lords are going to say so." I said that was their right to say. She said, "And your response?" I said my response was that the bond was real and the mark was real, and the court of Valdremore was welcome to arrange itself around that fact or to be ungracious about it. And in the latter case, I had 11 years of experience outweighing ungracious. She looked at me with something that might have been satisfaction. "Good," she said. Marin, for her part, was continuing to work in the linen hall. She was also, I noticed, because my post at the East Gate was technically available to me if I chose to stand there in the morning, which I sometimes did, in my own coat, which created a certain amount of gentle confusion among the actual guardsmen, receiving occasional visits from courtiers who were curious. She handled them with the same economy she handled everything. She was polite, she was not performing anything. She did not pretend to be more or less than she was, and she sent everyone away with the clear impression that she would be forming her own opinions in her own time, and that this was not negotiable. On the 11th day since the mark appeared, a lord whose name I will not record here, because it is not worth recording, went to the linen hall during a period when Marin was working alone, and he told her that she would be doing the Alpha King a kindness to step aside before the situation became embarrassing, and that there were women of appropriate station who would be glad to receive the king's attention, and that whatever she thought the bond meant, it could certainly be managed. I heard about this from Harwick within an hour. Harwick, who had been watching Marin with the professional appreciation of a guard captain for someone who does not startle easily, reported that Marin had listened to the Lord's speech in its entirety, thanked him for his concern, agreed that she was thinking very carefully about everything, and then pointed him to the door with the serene authority of someone who has been running a linen hall for 6 years, and is not remotely afraid of administrative pressure. The Lord had left, she had gone back to work. I stood in my study and I thought, I have a wolf who chose well. I also thought, if I leave this another day, I am going to allow the court to create a version of this situation that is not true, and Marin does not deserve to stand in the linen hall while lords try to convince her to make herself invisible. I went to find her. She was in the linen hall, as she almost always was, at a long table with a spread of the formal dining cloth that needed new hemming before the winter ceremonies. She looked up when I came in, she always looked up, I had noticed, with an expression that registered whoever had entered and adjusted accordingly, no more and no less. She registered me. She did not adjust much. I said, I would like to ask you something in front of the council. She set down her needle. That is not a small ask. No, I said. I know. She looked at me. I had learned in the weeks since the mark appeared that Marin's silences are not uncomfortable. They are working silences, she is thinking, and she is doing it carefully, and she does not fill the space with noise to reassure other people, which is a quality I had almost forgotten was possible in an adult human being. She said, "What will you ask me in front of the council?" I said, "Whether you will be my Luna." I paused. "And whether you will let me be the man who gave you back the cloak first before anything else." She was quiet. Outside, the ward sounds, the cart wheels, the kitchen noise, the low, steady rhythm of the castle's day, continued, ordinary and unhurried. Then she said, "I'll need to finish this hem first." I said, "Of course." I sat down on the workbench along the wall, the one where the apprentices left their extra spools, and I waited while she finished the hem. It took about 20 minutes. She worked with the same quality of attention she gave everything, present, unhurried, thorough. When she was done, she knotted the thread, cut it, and folded the cloth with the automatic precision of someone who has folded 10,000 cloths. Then she picked up her basket and said, "All right." The council chamber of Valdremore holds 20 men and women, my full council, seated around the long table, plus, on formal occasions, the lords of the outer wards, which adds another dozen. I had asked them to gather on short notice, which they did with the particular energy of people who have been waiting for something, and are not sure whether it is good news or a problem. I walked in with Marin beside me. She was wearing what she wore every day, her working dress, her hair pinned up, ink still on 2 fingers from the morning's inventory. And she walked into the council chamber with the same composure she brought to the courtyard and the study and the linen hall, which is to say she was entirely herself and entirely unconcerned with being assessed. The chamber went quiet the way it goes quiet when something unexpected is happening, and no one yet knows whether to speak. I stood at the head of the table. I did not sit. I held up my wrist, where the bonding mark was visible to everyone in the room, and I said, "You have been waiting for me to address the matter of the mark. I will address it now." I looked around the table. 3 weeks ago, I walked out of this castle in a guard's coat because I needed to understand what this place looks like when no one knows they are speaking to the king. I wanted to know what it felt like to be nobody important. I walked the inner ward for 7 days, and in those 7 days I was treated like a person, spoken to directly, corrected when I was wrong, and once given a spare cloak by someone who did not look at my face before giving it, because I needed the cloak, and that was sufficient reason. Silence, 20-some faces, attentive. The bond appeared on the 7th evening, I said, not because of any ceremony or any intention or any political arrangement, because my wolf recognized a person. That is how the bond works. That is how it has always worked. I looked at Lord Heaven, who was watching me with an expression of careful attention. There are those among you who would prefer a match from the list of suitable families. I understand that. It is not an unreasonable preference. I am telling you that the bond has made itself clear, and I am going to honor it. I looked at Marin. Marin of the Inner Ward Linen Hall, head seamstress of the palace, has agreed to speak with me in front of this council. Not because she is required to, not because the bond compels her, it does not, but because she is the most direct person I have met in 11 years, and she wanted to see what this room looked like before she made any final decisions. I paused, which I find entirely reasonable. Someone at the far end of the table made a sound, not dissent exactly, but the sound of a person recalibrating quickly. I said to Marin, "Will you be my Luna?" She looked at me, she looked at the room, she looked back at me. She said with the precision that was entirely her own, "I will, on the condition that you keep no more 7-day secrets and that the linen hall budget is corrected, because it has been 30% short of accurate for 4 years, and I have the documentation." The room went very quiet. I said, "Done and done." Marin nodded, satisfied. She turned to the room, not performing, just addressing it, the way she addressed any situation that required addressing, and she said, pleasantly and with absolute calm, "I am aware that I am not from a pack family. I am also aware that pack families do not typically manage a palace's cloth inventory, maintain its guard uniforms, or remember which lord owes for alterations going back 3 seasons. She looked at Lord Heaven, who had borrowed her services, and I suspected had not yet paid. "I keep very good records. I expect we will work well together." Lord Heaven, to his credit, said, "I believe we will." Lady Orvain, who had been watching all of this with an expression of satisfaction she was not quite concealing, said, "Welcome to the council table, lady." She looked at Marin. Marin said, just Marin is fine for now. We can sort the rest of it out. Lady Orvin smiled, which she did rarely and meant entirely. Just Marin, then? Welcome. The mark on my wrist burned warm once, as if in confirmation. My wolf, who had been still and watchful, lay down again in the comfortable way, the way of a creature whose long waiting is at its end. There is a thing that happens in a court, after a thing has been decided by the Alpha King and confirmed in council. The court adjusts. Not always gracefully, not always quickly, but with the particular pragmatism of people who understand that certain outcomes are not open for renegotiation. Lord Heaven paid his alterations bill within the week. Two of the lords who had been most pointed in their reservations about Marin Station came to the Linen Hall, separately, on ostensibly practical grounds, and left with the expressions of people who have reassessed something and would not be publicly acknowledging it, but had nonetheless reassessed. The third lord who came, the one who had told Marin, weeks earlier, to step aside for a woman of appropriate station, came to me, not to her, and offered an apology that was somewhat political in its construction but genuine in its essential substance. I accepted it. I told him that what mattered now was the working of the pack and the council, and that if he brought his considerable intelligence to that work rather than to the arrangement of court marriages, we would all be better served. He left somewhat chastened, and I think in the long run improved. Marin, when I told her about this, said, "Did he actually apologize?" I said, in the manner of a lord who is accustomed to being right, which is to say imperfectly but sincerely. She considered this. "All right," she said, "that's something." She was not interested in his humbling for its own sake. She was interested in the work in the Linen Hall budget, which did turn out to be 30% short of accurate for 4 years, and was corrected in a council session that she attended, and I listened to with the private joy of a man watching someone do something they are extraordinarily good at, and in the slow, careful business of learning what it meant to be the person the mark said she was. It did not happen all at once. We walked the castle, she and I, the way I had walked it alone in the guard's coat. She had not seen most of it, she said, which surprised me until I thought about it and realized that the Linen Hall did not require her to be anywhere else. I showed her the archive. She showed me the back routes through the servants' corridors, which I had used in the guard's coat but never mapped properly. She had them all memorized. "Efficient," I said. "It's a big building," she said. We ate dinner together, most nights, in a small room off the study, not the formal dining room, which I found as cheerless as it was large, but the map room adjacent, which had a good fire and a small table and not enough chairs to seat a retinue. The steward disapproved. Marin did not notice the steward's disapproval, which was its own form of management. She still worked in the Linen Hall. She had said she would keep working for a while until she understood what she was, and she was true to it, arriving early, leaving at dusk, managing her 3 assistants and 2 apprentices with the same brisk warmth she had always brought to it. I did not interfere with this. I had promised not to, and I kept promises now with particular care, because I had used up my quota of 7-day deceptions. She told me this. I said I was aware. She said good. The ceremony of formal bonding in the Valdremore tradition takes place at the winter solstice, in the Great Hall, in the presence of the pack. The wolves of the inner and outer wards, the council, the household, and whatever of the wider court has gathered for the season. It is not a short ceremony. It involves the Alpha's vow, the Luna's answer, the lighting of the hall fire, and by tradition going back before my grandfather, the wolves of the pack giving their acknowledgement, which they do by howling in sequence from the lowest rank to the highest, so that the sound builds and the hall holds it. I had attended this ceremony twice in my life, for other packs as a political courtesy. I had always found it somewhat formal and somewhat distant, the way ceremonies are when they do not concern you. Standing in the great hall on the solstice evening, with the fire lit behind us and the hall packed and Marin beside me in a dress that was, she had informed me, not from the formal wardrobe, but one she had made herself with the inner Linen Hall's good dark wool, because she preferred to wear something that fit correctly. I found it, for the first time, not distant at all. She had made her own dress. I had not known this until she told me 20 minutes before the ceremony, and I had said, involuntarily, "In the Linen Hall." And she had said, "Where else?" with such complete reasonableness that I had been unable to argue. The dress fit correctly. I gave my vow, the old words of the Valdremore line, the ones that commit the Alpha King to recognition, to protection, to the bond that the wolf named and the man chooses to honor. I said them clearly in the quiet of the hall with my eyes on her face. She gave her answer, the Luna's answer, which in the old form is brief and direct, which suited her exactly. I receive it. I answer it. I choose it freely, 3 sentences. She said them without hesitation, with the same composure she brought to every true thing she said. The mark on my wrist, which had been warm since the evening in the linen hall, flared once, bright and then settled, permanent, present, done. The wolves howled. It built from the edges of the hall inward, the low to the high, until the stone walls of Valdremore held the sound the way a good vessel holds water, full and still, and not spilling. Marin stood very still through it, listening. When it ended, she said, quietly for me, "That's extraordinary." I said, "Yes." She looked at the mark on my wrist, settled now, deep silver blue, no longer glowing but simply there, the way true things are simply there once they are done. She put her hand over it, briefly. Not a performance, just a person touching a thing she had agreed to. I covered her hand with mine. In the weeks that followed, when the ceremonies were done and the lords had adjusted, and the linen hall budget was corrected, and the castle had returned to its ordinary rhythm. The carts at 6 in the morning, the kitchen noise, the sound of the ward going about its business. I sometimes stood at the window of the study in the early dark, before the household was fully awake, and thought about the autumn evening that had started all of it. A guard's coat, a reigning ward, a woman carrying a mending basket who did not look at my face before she handed me a cloak. She came into the study one morning and found me at the window and said, without preamble, because she had dispensed with preamble early on, "You're thinking about the cloak again." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because you get a particular expression when you are thinking about how ridiculous the beginning of this was." She sat down at my desk. She had claimed 1/2 of it 2 weeks in, because she needed somewhere to work on her inventory and the linen hall was too cold in the mornings, and I had not objected, because I was not going to object to that, and opened her ledger. "It was ridiculous," she said. "It was," I agreed. "The Alpha King of Valdremore standing in the rain in his good shirt." She made a mark in the ledger. "Very dignified." "I thought so," I said. She looked up briefly with a not quite a smile. "And yet," she said, which was what she always said when something was absurd and true at the same time. "And yet," I agreed. My wolf, warm and still and satisfied in the way of a creature that has finally stopped waiting, listened to the castle wake around us, the carts, the kitchen, the ward, and found it good. The cloak was not mine to begin with. Neither was she, by any arrangement or plan or ceremony or expectation of any man alive. She was the Bond's, and mine only because she had looked at the mark and the man behind it and decided, with the same calm exactness she brought to everything, that she chose it, that we were worth choosing. I had walked into my own castle as nobody important to find out what a man felt like. What I found was the only person in Valdremore who had already known.